The Beauty and the Beast. Chapter 1. Introduction. The Village and Belle's Simple Life. In a small village surrounded by majestic mountains and vast green fields, lived a young woman named Belle. The village, with its stone cottages and thatched roofs, seemed like a quiet portrait of an ancient world where time passed slowly. The dirt roads wound between the houses, and the gentle sound of leaves rustling in the wind was the only constant noise, occasionally interrupted by the song of birds and the distant clink of cowbells. Every step through the village felt as though the heartbeat of the world was in sync with nature, tranquil and unhurried. Belle, with her brown hair as rich as the earth and eyes as deep as the night sky, was a young woman unlike the others. While the other women of the village busied themselves with simple, everyday tasks, cooking, washing clothes, and tending to animals, Belle was drawn to something more, something beyond the simple life of the village. She loved the routine of her life, yet inside there was a gentle yearning for something greater, something she could not fully understand. Every day after completing her chores, Belle would retreat to a special corner of her garden, where wildflowers painted the surroundings with shades of yellow, purple, and red. This garden was Belle's sanctuary, a place where she could escape from the expectations of the world around her and find peace in her own company. There, among the plants and trees that seemed to embrace the soft breeze, she would sit on a rustic wooden bench, a bench that seemed to have been made just for her. With a book in her hands, she would dive into distant worlds, into stories that carried her to unknown lands and adventures full of enchantment. The sweet scent of the flowers mingled with the aroma of old books, which Belle carefully collected and cherished. She loved the sensation of turning each page, soaking in every word, every description. Books were the key to her dreams, to the places she imagined, where magic and mysteries filled the air. Belle felt that, in reading, she was touching the infinite. Her eyes would sparkle as she read stories of brave princesses, valiant heroes, and realms of unexplored wonder. But at the same time, there was a sense of emptiness that accompanied her, as though something was missing. A void she could not define but which pushed her to seek more, to look for something beyond what her eyes could see. Although Belle's life was filled with peaceful moments, there was something in her heart that longed for more than the tranquil routine of the village. She felt like a solitary leaf floating on the wind, not knowing exactly where it would be carried. Her mind often wandered to thoughts of the future, of a destiny that seemed far off but one she felt she was meant for. Amid the tranquility of the village, Belle couldn't help but sense that something extraordinary awaited her, something she didn't fully understand yet. And despite the simple beauty of her life, Belle sometimes felt lonely, not from a lack of friends or company, but from the feeling that no one around her shared her restlessness. The other people in the village were content with their lives, with the simple and familiar traditions, but Belle longed for something different. She felt that there was more, something her soul sought, something hidden beyond the mountains and beyond the words in her books. It was in the quiet afternoons, when the sky was tinged with shades of orange and pink, that Belle would sit at the edge of the garden, gazing at the horizon, lost in thought. The wind would gently caress her hair, and for a moment she imagined that the world itself was conspiring to guide her toward something grand. The trees swayed softly, and the golden fields in the distance seemed to stretch to infinity, as though offering an invitation to a journey Belle felt destined to take, though she didn't yet know how. In her peaceful solitude, Belle would reflect on the meaning of life, on the quest for something greater, something that lay beyond the simplicity of her surroundings. It was a feeling that whispered to her heart, urging her to search for what her soul longed for, though she could not yet put it into words. Chapter 2. Belle's father and his journey to the market. As the sun began to rise, casting a soft, golden light across the village, Belle's father, Maurice, prepared for his journey to the market. The air was crisp with the promise of a new day, and the sounds of the village slowly came to life, filling the quiet morning with the gentle hum of daily routines. Maurice, a kind and hard-working man, was well known throughout the village for his skill in making wooden furniture. His workshop, nestled at the back of their cottage, always smelled of fresh pine and polished wood, and the soft scraping of tools against the grain filled the air as he worked. Yet, on this day he was preparing for something different. Maurice had been planning his trip to the market for several days. He needed to trade some of his handmade goods for provisions and supplies, which would keep their small household running smoothly for weeks to come. The market, located in a neighboring town, was a place where villagers from far and wide gathered to exchange goods, stories, and news. It was always a bustling place, filled with the scent of fresh bread, herbs, and the hum of conversation. But today, as Maurice packed his cart, there was a slight heaviness in his heart, a quiet uncertainty that lingered in his thoughts. Belle, with her quiet grace, had helped her father prepare for the journey. She made sure his coat was patched and that he had a warm scarf to wear against the chill of the morning. As she worked, she noticed the familiar nervousness in his movements, the small frown on his brow as he gathered his things. He was a good man, honest and hard-working, but the world outside the safety of their village often filled him with unease. Belle, who understood her father's moods well, said little as she helped him, but her heart swelled with a quiet affection for him. He had always done his best to provide for her, to give her everything she needed, even though their life was humble. With a final check of his cart, Maurice turned to Belle, his face softening with a smile. "Take care, my dear. I'll be back before the sun sets," he said, his voice steady but carrying an underlying sense of trepidation. Belle nodded, offering him a warm smile in return, though her thoughts were clouded with an unspoken worry. She kissed him on the cheek, and he set off down the winding village path, his cart creaking under the weight of the goods he would bring back. As he passed through the village square, Maurice greeted the familiar faces of his neighbors, exchanging pleasantries as he made his way toward the edge of the village. The morning was peaceful, the streets quiet, save for the sound of birds calling from the trees. Yet, as he walked, there was something that unsettled him, something he couldn't quite place. It wasn't the journey itself that bothered him. He had made this trip many times before, but there was a strange feeling in the air, a quiet tension that seemed to hang just beyond the edge of his awareness. As he approached the dense forest that marked the beginning of the path to the market, Maurice's eyes wandered to the distance, where the silhouette of the beast's castle loomed. It was a sight that sent a shiver down his spine every time he saw it. The castle was distant, tucked away deep within the forest, and though Maurice had only heard rumors of the creature who lived there, he could not help but feel a sense of dread whenever his gaze fell upon the towering stone walls. There were whispers among the villagers, tales of the beast who ruled the castle, a monstrous creature with a heart as cold as the stone walls of his fortress. Some said he was a cursed prince, others claimed he was a monster, a creature so terrifying that even the bravest men dared not venture near his home. Maurice, who had never been one to put stock in rumors, nevertheless felt an uneasy pull whenever the castle came into view. It was as though the very air around it was thick with mystery, with something that could not be explained. The road to the market veered off just before reaching the castle, and Maurice knew better than to venture closer. He had heard the stories, of course, but it was not the stories that troubled him. It was the feeling, the quiet, unsettling sensation that the castle was watching, waiting. Maurice quickened his pace as he passed the final bend in the road that marked the edge of the forest. He cast one final glance toward the dark, looming shape of the castle, and a small sigh escaped his lips. There was something about that place that made his chest tighten, a curiosity he could never fully quell despite the discomfort it brought. As Maurice continued on his journey, The path before him became clearer. The trees parted, and the sun shone more brightly, as if guiding him away from the mysterious castle. The village faded from view behind him, and soon he was alone on the well-worn road that led to the market town. The familiar sounds of the village were replaced by the soft rustling of the wind through the trees, and the rhythmic sound of his cart's wheels on the gravel path. Despite the unease that lingered in his chest, Maurice found a measure of peace in the steady motion of the journey. It was a journey he had taken many times before, and yet, with every passing moment, the strange feeling that had accompanied him from the village grew stronger. Chapter 3: The Encounter with the Beast. The sun had long since risen to its peak, and the day stretched lazily across the sky as Maurice continued his journey. The air, once crisp, had warmed as he approached the outskirts of the market town, and the forest around him gradually began to thin. His cart rattled gently as the road turned from rough gravel to smoother stones, but his thoughts remained far from the town and the bustling market that awaited him. Instead, his mind kept wandering back to the dark silhouette of the beast's castle, the towering stone walls looming just beyond the trees. It was a sight he could never forget, a place that seemed as though it didn't belong to the world at all, standing in stark contrast to the simple beauty of the village and the land that surrounded it. The castle, with its tall spires reaching into the sky like fingers stretching toward the heavens, had always seemed out of place, mysterious, and intimidating. Despite the calming warmth of the afternoon sun, there was an undeniable chill that ran down Maurice's spine each time his gaze strayed toward it. As he neared the edge of the forest, Maurice paused, hesitating for a moment. His heart quickened, not from fear but from curiosity, a longing to understand the mystery of the place. He had heard the stories, dark, terrifying tales about the beast who ruled the castle, but in the quiet solitude of his journey, Maurice's doubts began to creep in. Perhaps the beast was no monster at all, but simply a man trapped by a cruel fate, bound to the shadows of his own home. With a deep breath, Maurice urged his horse forward, the animal's hooves clattering softly against the cobblestones as they made their way toward the entrance of the castle. The gate stood tall and imposing, crafted from wrought iron and twisted vines that seemed to grow directly from the earth itself. The air around the gates felt different, heavier, as if the very atmosphere was holding its breath. Maurice swallowed hard, feeling the tension rise in his chest, but he pressed on. The massive doors of the castle creaked open slowly as though waiting for him. Inside, the air was thick and still, the stone walls cool and shadowed, with faint traces of candlelight flickering in the distance. Maurice's footsteps echoed as he moved further into the castle's grand hall. The sound of his footsteps was strangely muted by the thick carpets that lined the floor, and the grand chandeliers above hung low, casting a warm glow over the space. Despite the opulence of the castle, there was an unsettling emptiness to it, as if the walls themselves were hollow, watching, waiting. As he stepped deeper into the hall, Maurice felt the weight of his own presence, as though he was intruding on something ancient and untouchable. The silence was profound, broken only by the distant murmur of the castle's vast, empty chambers. It was not the eerie silence of a place abandoned, but rather the silence of something alive, alive but hidden from view. Suddenly, from the shadows, a deep voice called out, rich and powerful, reverberating through the stone walls. "Why have you come here, traveler?" The voice was low and commanding, with an edge of something that seemed both curious and wary. Maurice froze in place, his heart pounding in his chest. He had expected to feel fear, but the voice, though deep and dark, did not strike terror in him. Instead, it filled him with a sense of awe, of uncertainty. Slowly, he turned to face the source of the voice. Emerging from the shadows was the beast. His figure was imposing, cloaked in darkness, his features shrouded in mystery. At first glance, Maurice could hardly make sense of what he saw. The beast's form seemed to flicker between shadows, half human and half animal, with a hulking frame that towered over him. His eyes, though fierce and glowing with a faint light, held a strange sadness, as though they had seen more than they should. His fur was dark, nearly blending into the shadows of the room, and his movements were slow, deliberate, as though each step was weighed by some invisible force. The beast's gaze fixed on Maurice with a mixture of suspicion and curiosity, but there was no immediate anger, no wrathful roar as the villagers had whispered. Instead, there was something almost sad in his eyes, a weariness that belied his fearsome appearance. I came only to rest," Maurice stammered, his voice unsteady but polite. "I did not mean to intrude, my lord." The beast took a step forward, his movements heavy but graceful, as though he were aware of his own size and power. His gaze softened slightly, though his words were still stern. "You are not the first to enter these halls seeking shelter," the beast said quietly. "But you must understand, not all who enter leave unscathed." Maurice nodded nervously, taking a small step back, his eyes never leaving the beast. He had heard enough stories to know that the castle was no place for the faint of heart, but he had not expected the creature to speak with such a hauntingly calm demeanor. After a long moment, the beast motioned for Maurice to follow him deeper into the castle. The air grew heavier with each step, the grand hall opening into a series of smaller rooms, their walls adorned with dark tapestries and paintings of strange, mystical scenes. The quiet hum of the castle felt almost alive, as if the stones themselves were breathing. As they walked through the halls, Maurice's attention was drawn to a single delicate object resting on a pedestal in the center of the room, a single beautiful rose. The petals shimmered in the dim light, an almost ethereal glow surrounding them, as though they were somehow beyond the reach of time. The rose was unlike any Maurice had ever seen, and it stirred something deep within him, an inexplicable desire to touch it. Without thinking, and driven by a mix of awe and wonder, Maurice stepped forward, his hand reaching out toward the rose. The beast, sensing the movement, turned sharply, his eyes flashing with sudden fury. "No," the beast growled, his voice shaking the very air. "That rose is forbidden." Maurice froze, his fingers hovering just above the delicate petals. He had not meant to anger the beast, but the temptation was too strong. He quickly withdrew his hand, but the damage was done. The beast's gaze was cold, his voice low and menacing. "You have broken my one rule," the beast said, his tone heavy with disappointment. "And now you must pay the price." Chapter 4: The Threat and the Father's Decision. The silence that followed the beast's command was thick and oppressive, stretching out like a long drawn-out breath that had yet to be exhaled. The air in the castle seemed to hold its weight, pressing against Maurice's chest, making it harder to breathe. His heart raced, and for a moment he felt as though the walls themselves were closing in around him. The beast stood still, his massive form looming over Maurice like a storm cloud, his eyes glowing with an intensity that sent a chill down Maurice's spine. His deep voice broke the stillness once again, a low growl that vibrated through the floor beneath Maurice's feet. "You have broken my rule, old man," the beast rumbled, his words carrying the weight of inevitability. "The price must be paid." Maurice's hands trembled slightly as he clasped them together, his mind racing. His mind, which had been clouded with the fear and wonder of the castle, was now flooded with a frantic desperation. He had not meant to break the beast's rule. He had not meant to provoke such wrath. But the rose, it had been so beautiful, so delicate. Its allure had been impossible to resist. I did not mean to offend," Maurice stammered, his voice trembling with an edge of panic. I only admired the rose. I meant no harm." Please have mercy." The beast's gaze did not soften, and his voice was unyielding. "The rose is not just a flower. It is the symbol of my one rule. You broke it. Now you must pay the price." Maurice took a small step back, his chest tightening as his mind scrambled to find a way out. The reality of the situation settled over him like a heavy fog. He was trapped in the castle, surrounded by an unknown, powerful creature whose anger he could not escape. "Please," Maurice whispered, his voice barely more than a breath. "I cannot stay. My family. I have a daughter. She's all I have. I beg you, let me go. Take anything you want, but spare her. She is innocent." For the briefest moment, the beast's expression seemed to waver, a flicker of something, perhaps pity or uncertainty, crossing his face. But it was gone as quickly as it had come, and the beast stepped closer, his presence overwhelming. "The price must be paid," the beast repeated, his voice unwavering. "You broke my rule. It is only fair that you suffer the consequences." Maurice swallowed hard, his thoughts spinning as he searched for some way to save himself, to save his daughter. His gaze darted around the room, trying to find something that might offer an answer, but the vast, empty spaces seemed to mock him, offering no escape. Desperation clouded his judgment. He knew he couldn't leave, not without the beast's mercy. He had no choice but to plead. "I beg you," Maurice said again, his voice choked with emotion. "Please, I will do anything. Anything you ask. Just let me go. I will return to my daughter. She is all I have left in this world. Please take me, but let her live her life." The beast's gaze softened slightly, but his expression remained stoic, unreadable. He looked at Maurice, and for a moment, it seemed as though he were seeing through the man, into the depths of his soul. "You must pay for what you have done," the beast said, his voice low and deliberate. "But I will offer you one chance, one way to save yourself." Maurice's heart leaped, hope flickering in his chest like a tiny spark. He stepped forward, his voice filled with urgency. "Anything, please." The beast's eyes glinted, and for the first time, his voice held a hint of something softer. "You will return to your home. You will bring your daughter to me. She will take your place in this castle." Maurice's breath caught in his throat. The words hit him like a wave, crashing over him, suffocating him. His daughter. His beloved Belle. She was just a girl, innocent, kind, full of life. He could not, would not, condemn her to this fate. "Please," he began, his voice cracking with desperation. "She is just a child. She cannot pay for my mistake. I cannot ask this of her. I would rather face the consequences myself." The beast's expression hardened, and his form seemed to swell with anger. His eyes glowed brighter, burning with an intensity that made the room feel even colder. "You have no choice," the beast growled, his voice laced with a harsh finality. "If you wish to live, if you wish for your daughter to remain safe, she must take your place. If you do not bring her here within 3 days, the consequences will be far worse than you can imagine." Maurice staggered back, his mind spinning. His knees felt weak, and his chest tightened with the unbearable weight of the decision that had been thrust upon him. His only child, his beautiful Belle, she was everything to him, the light in his life. To ask her to come here to take his place, it was unthinkable. But what other choice did he have? He had broken the beast's rule, and now there was no escaping the consequences. The weight of the decision pressed down on him, his heart heavy with fear and guilt. He had to protect Belle no matter the cost. "I will return," he said at last, his voice low and filled with resignation. "I will bring her to you." The beast regarded him silently, his glowing eyes dimming slightly, but there was no warmth in his gaze. It was as if the beast were already turning away from any semblance of mercy. "Remember," The beast's voice was colder now. "Time is running out." Maurice nodded, his heart sinking as he turned and made his way back toward the gates of the castle. The weight of his decision hung over him like a dark cloud, each step heavier than the last. His thoughts were consumed by the one thing that had kept him going, Belle. He had to find a way to protect her, to shield her from the terrible fate that awaited her. But he knew, deep in his heart, that the time for answers was running out. The journey back to the village seemed endless, and the once familiar path now felt like a long road into uncertainty. Every step he took was filled with dread for what he would have to do. As the castle faded into the distance behind him, the world ahead was clouded by the weight of his promise. And as he approached his home, he knew that everything was about to change. Chapter 5. Belle sets out in search of her father. The soft light of dawn filtered through the trees, casting long, gentle shadows upon the quiet path ahead. Belle stood at the edge of the village, her heart filled with a mixture of unease and determination. The quiet morning air seemed to carry with it the weight of the decision she had made. She had never imagined that such a journey would fall upon her, yet here she was, standing at the threshold of the unknown, ready to step into a world far beyond the comforts of her small village. As the sun rose higher, its warmth kissed her cheeks, but it did little to chase the chill that had settled deep within her. The promise her father had made to the beast echoed in her mind, repeating in the quietest corners of her thoughts. She had not known what to expect when her father returned, pale and shaken from his encounter with the creature. But when he spoke of the beast's demand that she come to the castle in his place, the weight of it was too much for her to bear. Her father's desperation had been evident, his voice strained with emotion, and though she had not fully understood the reason behind his promise, she knew she had to do something. The love she held for her father, the man who had given her everything, stirred within her like a quiet, unshakable force. She would not leave him in the clutches of the beast. If she had to walk into the unknown, if she had to face a world she could scarcely imagine, she would do so, for him. Belle took a slow, steady breath and looked down at the path that stretched out before her. The world around her was still. Birds sang softly in the distance, their melodies blending with the rustle of leaves in the gentle breeze. It was a peaceful, serene morning, yet inside her, a storm of thoughts swirled. Her mind wandered to the castle she had only heard of in whispers, its dark walls, its mysterious presence that had always seemed so far removed from her simple life. What would she find when she arrived there? What was this beast that had claimed her father's life in exchange for a rose? She reached down and adjusted the straps of the small satchel she had packed. A few pieces of bread, a flask of water, and a warm cloak to keep her comfortable on the journey, these were her only possessions now. She had no idea how long the path would take or what dangers lay ahead, but she knew one thing for certain. She had no choice but to go. Her heart was steady, though there was a quiet tremor in her chest. The road ahead was uncertain, but with each step she took, Belle found a strange comfort in the rhythm of her movements. One step after another. The world around her seemed to fall into place as the familiar sounds of her village faded away, replaced by the quiet whisper of the wind and the soft crunch of her footsteps on the dirt path. As she walked, her thoughts turned inward, reflecting on the journey that had brought her here. She had often felt an undercurrent of restlessness in her life, a yearning for something more. The small village had always been her home, yet it sometimes felt as though the world beyond it held untold stories, waiting for someone to discover them. Now, it seemed that she was that someone, drawn by a force greater than herself, pulled toward the unknown by a love so deep it had overridden her fears. Her journey, though uncertain, was hers to make. She embraced it with a calm resolve. "I will find him," Belle whispered softly, the words barely leaving her lips. "I will bring him home." Her father had sacrificed so much for her, and now it was her turn to give everything she had to him. The unknown stretched out ahead, but her love for him was stronger than any fear that threatened to creep in. As the morning sun rose higher, Belle's journey began in earnest, her footsteps light but purposeful, each step taking her farther from the village she had always known. She felt the weight of the road beneath her feet, and though her heart fluttered with the uncertainty of what lay ahead, there was a strange peace in the quiet simplicity of the journey itself. With each passing moment, Belle was reminded of the world around her, the rustling of leaves, the distant calls of animals, the soft hum of nature that had always been her companion. It was as if the earth itself was guiding her, soothing her fears and lifting her spirits with every step. And so she walked, the world unfolding around her, the castle still far away, but drawing nearer with every breath she took. As she continued on, the quiet rhythm of her journey seemed to match the calm, steady beat of her heart. Each step was a small act of courage, each breath a reminder that she was not alone. The road may have been long, the destination uncertain, but the love she carried for her father, strong and unwavering, was the compass that guided her forward. Chapter 6. Arrival at the castle and first moments with the beast. As Belle approached the castle, the world around her seemed to grow quieter, as if nature itself was holding its breath in anticipation. The towering spires of the castle loomed against the soft twilight sky, casting long dark shadows over the path that led up to its massive gates. The stone walls were ancient and weathered, their surface rough and cold to the touch, as though they had witnessed centuries of secrets and untold stories. A sense of awe filled Belle as she stood before the gates, but there was also a tinge of unease, an undercurrent of something unknown, something she could not yet grasp. The castle, so grand and imposing, stood like a silent guardian, its very presence overwhelming. Its vast silhouette seemed to stretch endlessly toward the sky, its windows dark and uninviting, like hollow eyes watching her every movement. It was not a place that welcomed warmth or light. Instead, it seemed to absorb all the sound and color of the world around it. The wind whispered softly through the trees, but the castle itself seemed to remain untouched by the life that flourished just beyond its reach. Belle paused for a moment at the entrance, taking in the enormity of the structure before her. The iron gates were intricately wrought, twisted into strange, beautiful shapes that seemed to pulse with an ancient energy. Her heart quickened slightly, but she breathed deeply, gathering her courage. This was the place she had come to find, and though it felt like stepping into another world entirely, she knew there was no turning back now. With a quiet, steady breath, Belle stepped forward, her feet light but resolute on the cold stone beneath her. The sound of her footsteps echoed in the vast, empty space around her, as though the castle itself was waiting, watching her with quiet patience. The air was thick with a strange stillness, and the world outside the castle seemed to fade away, leaving only the deep, muted silence of the walls and the soft rhythm of her heartbeat. Inside the castle, the atmosphere was heavy, like the air had not been disturbed in years. The grand hall stretched out before her, its high ceilings soaring above, supported by stone columns that seemed to stretch into infinity. The walls were lined with tapestries, their colors faded by time, and the flickering light from torches cast long shadows across the cold stone floors. The castle was vast, but there was no warmth to be found here, no inviting fire or gentle light. It felt as though the world outside had been left far behind, and only the hushed echo of time remained. Belle walked cautiously, her footsteps soft and careful as she moved deeper into the castle. The silence was overwhelming, broken only by the occasional creak of old wood or the distant rustle of something unseen. Each room she passed seemed to hold its own secrets, and the oppressive stillness wrapped itself around her like a cloak. She could not help but feel a sense of isolation, the weight of the castle's emptiness pressing in on her from all sides. It was as though she were the only living thing in the entire place, surrounded by the quiet remains of a forgotten time. Then, as she ventured deeper into the labyrinthine corridors, she heard it, a low, rumbling sound like the growl of some great beast. Her heart skipped a beat, and for a moment she wondered if it was her imagination. But no, the sound was real and it was growing closer. She held her breath as she continued down the hall, the air growing colder with each step. And then there he was, the beast. He appeared before her like a shadow, large and imposing, his form a mass of dark fur and muscle. His eyes gleamed with a strange, intense light, and his presence seemed to fill the room, casting everything else into sharp contrast. His face was twisted in a permanent snarl, his features monstrous and yet somehow tragic. He stood tall, towering over her, and for a moment, the world seemed to hold its breath as they stared at each other. Belle felt a shiver run down her spine. She had heard stories of the beast, but to see him standing before her, so real and so close, was something entirely different. He was not the creature of myth she had imagined, nor was he the terrifying monster that her father had described. He was something more complex, something that evoked both fear and pity in equal measure. The beast did not speak at first, his gaze fixed on her with an intensity that was almost suffocating. Belle stood frozen, her mind racing, her thoughts tangled in a web of confusion and uncertainty. What was this creature? What was his purpose here? Why had he chosen her father? And now, why had she been brought here? But in that moment she did not speak. She simply stood there, watching him, feeling the weight of his presence in the silence between them. She could sense the anger that simmered beneath the surface of his form, but there was also something else. A loneliness, a sadness that seemed to radiate from him as if he, too, had been waiting for something. For someone. The tension between them was thick, but Belle remained calm. She had come this far, and now there was no turning back. She had to face him, whatever he was and whatever he might become. As the moment stretched on, Belle's breath grew steady, her heart quiet once more. She had no words, no answers, but she understood in that quiet moment that this was where her journey had led her. To the beast, to the heart of the castle, and to the mystery that lay hidden within the stone walls. She took another slow breath, and then, with great care, she spoke. "I've come," she said softly, her voice a quiet thread in the stillness. "I've come for my father. Whatever price you ask, I will pay it." The beast's gaze softened ever so slightly, and for the briefest of moments, there was no growl, no threat, just an unsettling silence. And then, with a deep, guttural voice, he answered. "You are brave," he said. "But the price you will pay is not as simple as you might think." Chapter 7. Life in the Castle, Belle's Routine and the Mystery of the Beast. The days stretched on in the castle, and Belle gradually settled into a routine that, though strange and unfamiliar, became a comforting rhythm in the midst of all the mystery. The vast halls, the cold stone walls, and the dim light that filtered through the tall, narrow windows slowly became her new reality. Every morning, she awoke to the soft sounds of the castle, the distant echo of wind sweeping through the halls, the creaking of ancient wood, and the whisper of footsteps from unseen servants, whose presence seemed almost ethereal. The castle was a place of silence, broken only by the occasional rustling of old tapestries or the gentle clinking of porcelain as a servant silently entered her chamber with breakfast. Belle's room, though simple, was a quiet sanctuary. A large four-poster bed, draped in soft linens, rested against one wall, and a wooden dresser, weathered but sturdy, stood beside a grand fireplace, its hearth unlit but still holding a trace of warmth. The room was decorated in muted tones of gold and green, giving it an almost regal air, though there was an absence of warmth that Belle couldn't shake. As the days passed, Belle grew accustomed to the strange rhythm of life at the castle. Each morning she would wander the halls, exploring rooms that seemed to stretch on endlessly, full of forgotten treasures and untold stories. The air was thick with the scent of old books, dust, and the faintest trace of something floral. Perhaps the roses that grew in abundance around the castle's gardens, their petals delicate and soft, yet tinged with a sense of mystery. She spent her afternoons in the library, a vast room lined with shelves upon shelves of ancient books. The scent of leather-bound volumes filled the space, and Belle would often lose herself in their pages, reading of faraway lands, of adventures that seemed to be so distant from her own reality. The library became her sanctuary, a place where she could escape the quiet unease that surrounded her. But the castle, though fascinating in its own way, held a strange tension that Belle could not ignore. There was something unsettled about the place, something that kept her on edge, even as she tried to settle into her new life. The servants, though polite and kind, seemed to move about with a quiet grace, almost as if they were part of the very walls themselves, appearing and disappearing without warning. They were always there, but rarely in the light. It was as though they were bound to the castle by some unseen force, their lives intertwined with its ancient stones. At times, Belle would catch glimpses of them, a soft rustle of fabric as one of the servants disappeared into the shadows, or a fleeting motion at the corner of her eye. But when she turned to look, there was never anyone to be seen. The castle seemed to breathe around her, a living, pulsing entity, and yet it was utterly silent. It felt as though the very walls were holding their breath, waiting for something to happen. As for the beast, he remained an enigma, distant and aloof. Their interactions were few, each encounter brief and laden with an unspoken tension. He would visit her at dinner, his presence looming over her as he sat at the far end of the table, his dark eyes watching her intently. His voice was low and rumbling, carrying a weight that seemed to settle in the air between them. But no matter how much Belle tried, she could not find a way to break through the walls he had built around himself. He was always distant, always guarded, as though he feared something, or perhaps someone. And yet there were moments, fleeting and brief, when the beast's mask would slip. In the quiet of the evening, as the light dimmed and the shadows grew long, Belle would catch glimpses of his vulnerability. She would see the way his shoulders tensed, the way his gaze softened for a split second when he thought she wasn't looking. There were moments when he seemed more human, more like the man he might have once been. But those moments were always fleeting, as if he were afraid to reveal too much of himself. Despite the tension, Belle began to sense that the beast was not the terrifying creature he appeared to be. There was something beneath the surface, something that spoke of pain and regret. And though she did not yet understand it, there was a quiet sorrow in him that mirrored her own. She wondered if, perhaps, they were not so different after all. The other strange part of her life at the castle was the growing sense of comfort that began to settle over her. She had been alone for so long, and though the castle's emptiness was still unsettling, there was a strange solace in it. The walls of the castle held a sense of permanence, of history, as though time itself had stopped here. There were no distractions, no noise from the outside world, and for the first time in a long time, Belle felt as if she could hear her own thoughts clearly. She began to reflect on her life, on the choices that had led her here, and on the family she had left behind. Yet, with the comfort came a sense of growing unease. The castle, for all its grandeur, felt like a place of endless waiting. It was as though everyone and everything within its walls was suspended in time, caught between what had been and what might come. Belle could not shake the feeling that something was about to change, something that would break the stillness of this place and alter the course of her life forever. And so, as the days turned into weeks, Belle continued to adapt to her new life. She would often find herself walking the castle's long corridors, tracing her fingers along the stone walls, her thoughts lost in a world of possibilities. She was not sure what she was searching for, but she knew that she had to keep moving, keep exploring. There was something about the castle, something about the beast, that called to her in a way she could not explain. Perhaps in time she would come to understand it. Perhaps in time she would find the answers she sought. But for now she could only wait, as the castle waited, as the beast waited, and continue her quiet journey through the mystery that lay within its walls. Chapter 8: Exploration of the Castle and Discovery of Secrets. As the days melted quietly into one another, Belle found herself drawn to the mystery that lingered in every corner of the castle. Though the stillness of the place was both comforting and strange, her curiosity could not be contained. The walls, adorned with centuries-old tapestries, the dimly lit corridors, and the endless chambers seemed to call to her, urging her to uncover their secrets. And so, with each passing day, she wandered further, her footsteps soft upon the cold, stone floors, her eyes seeking what lay hidden in the shadows. The castle, though vast, felt oddly intimate in its own way, as though it had been built to cradle its secrets within the folds of its walls. Some rooms were more inviting, their gentle warmth and soft furnishings offering a fleeting sense of comfort, while others remained cold and dark, as though they had long been forgotten by time itself. But as Belle explored, she began to notice the subtle traces of life that remained. A forgotten book left open on a table, a single flower pressed carefully between the pages of a journal, the faint scent of rose petals that lingered in the air. Her exploration began in the castle's many gardens, which stretched out into the distance, their beauty hiding beneath a quiet, haunting stillness. Each garden was a world unto itself, filled with overgrown paths that twisted like forgotten dreams, their edges softened by the gentle caress of time. Trees, heavy with moss, stood as silent sentinels, their branches swaying gently in the breeze, and flowers bloomed in brilliant bursts of color, despite the quiet decay that clung to the land. It was in these gardens that Belle found a strange sense of peace. They were both wild and untamed, yet there was a beauty to their abandonment that seemed to mirror the castle itself. As she wandered through the gardens, her fingers brushing the petals of the flowers and the rough bark of the trees, she felt an unspoken connection to the place. The garden seemed to pulse with a quiet energy, as though it, too, was waiting for something to change. There was a sense of longing that resonated in the air, a feeling that had settled deep within her heart since her arrival. One afternoon, as the golden light of the sun filtered through the trees, Belle stumbled upon a hidden path that she had never noticed before. The path was narrow, overgrown with ivy, and seemed to disappear into the distance. Intrigued, she followed it, her heart beating softly in her chest as she ventured deeper into the unknown. The path led her to a small, secluded courtyard, tucked away in the heart of the castle. Here the air was still and the quiet was absolute. At the center of the courtyard stood a fountain, its stone basin weathered by years of neglect, but still holding a trace of its former beauty. Water trickled softly from the fountain's spout, filling the space with a gentle, soothing sound. Belle approached it, her gaze falling on the intricately carved stone that surrounded the fountain, and for the first time since her arrival, she felt a true sense of connection to the castle. It was in this quiet space that Belle began to understand that the castle was not simply a place of shadows and mystery, it was also a place of memory, of forgotten history that had been left behind, waiting for someone to discover it once again. As days passed, Belle's exploration of the castle's secrets deepened. She discovered rooms hidden behind secret panels, long-forgotten libraries filled with dust-covered books, and corridors that twisted into labyrinths of forgotten chambers. Each discovery seemed to beckon her further into the heart of the castle's mysteries. She found portraits of long-forgotten ancestors, their faces painted with the weight of time, and old diaries that spoke of a life lived in an age long past. It was within these forgotten pages that Belle uncovered the story of the beast, a tale that was as tragic as it was strange. She learned that the beast had once been a man, a prince who had lived in this very castle. But a curse, cast upon him in a moment of arrogance, had transformed him into the creature he was now. The curse was tied to a deep, ancient magic that had bound him to the castle, trapping him within its walls for eternity. The more Belle read, the more she began to understand the depth of the beast's pain. The curse had stripped him of his humanity, leaving him with only his monstrous form as a reminder of his past sins. He had once been a proud and selfish man, but now he was bound to live in solitude, his only companions the enchanted servants and the silent walls of the castle. The only way to break the curse, it seemed, was for someone to see beyond the beast's terrifying appearance and love him despite it. But that, Belle realized, was a challenge that seemed impossible. As she pondered this, her thoughts often drifted to the beast himself. She had seen him at the dinner table, his eyes heavy with a sorrow that seemed to weigh him down. She had seen the way he moved through the castle, his footsteps echoing in the empty halls, as though he were searching for something that could not be found. And in those moments she began to see something she had not seen before. A man trapped, not in his monstrous form, but in the very castle that held him captive. The more she learned about the curse, the more Belle felt a deep sense of empathy for the beast. She could not help but wonder if there was a way to help him, a way to break the chains that bound him to the castle and to his own loneliness. But as she continued to explore, she knew that the answer was not something that could be found in books or hidden corridors. It would take something more, something deeper, to break the curse that held the beast in its grip. In the days that followed, Belle's exploration of the castle continued, her steps guided by a quiet determination to uncover the truth of the beast's curse. She spent hours wandering the hidden halls, lost in her thoughts and the weight of what she had learned. And though the castle remained a place of solitude and mystery, she began to feel that perhaps in the end, it would not be its secrets that would free the beast. It would be something much simpler: understanding, compassion, and perhaps a love that could heal both him and the castle itself. Chapter 9. First Signs of Change. The silent friendship begins. The days continued to pass in their quiet rhythm, with Belle becoming increasingly accustomed to her life in the castle. The stillness of the place, once overwhelming and unsettling, began to feel more like a gentle companion, always present but never intrusive. As she wandered the castle's halls and explored its hidden corners, she began to notice the subtle shifts in the atmosphere, the moments that spoke of something beyond the silence and the mystery. One evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a soft golden glow across the castle's towering walls, Belle found herself once again in the grand dining hall. It had become a familiar place, yet still, every time she entered, the vastness of the room seemed to take her breath away. The table, set for two, was always waiting, though it seemed almost too large for such an intimate meal. Belle, sitting at one end, would often find herself gazing down at the empty space across from her, wondering what it might be like to share a meal with someone who did not merely sit in silence. The beast entered quietly, his heavy footsteps echoing in the vast space. The moment he stepped into the room, there was an undeniable shift in the air, a sense that something was different. His gaze, usually guarded and distant, seemed softer, as though he too had been contemplating something beyond the usual routine. As always, he took his seat at the far end of the table, the space between them a reminder of the distance that had always existed between them. And yet, on this evening, something about the silence felt less uncomfortable. It was as if, in their shared solitude, an unspoken understanding had begun to take root. Belle, looking up from her plate, caught his eye for a brief moment. She had become accustomed to the way he avoided direct eye contact, as though his monstrous appearance might frighten her or cause her to recoil. But tonight, she found that his eyes were not filled with anger or rage as she had once thought. Instead, they seemed heavy with a deep sadness, a sorrow that spoke volumes without a single word. She did not look away. Instead, she offered him a small, quiet smile. It was not one of pity, but of understanding, an offering of kindness that spoke of her growing awareness of the depth beneath his fearsome exterior. And in that fleeting moment, something shifted. The beast's gaze softened ever so slightly, and for the first time, he did not turn away. The meal passed in its usual quiet manner, with only the sound of the clinking of silverware breaking the silence between them. Yet, within that stillness, there was a sense of connection that had never been there before. Belle's heart, once filled with unease and apprehension, now held a quiet empathy for the beast, a recognition that he too was a prisoner of sorts, trapped not only by the curse that had transformed him but by the weight of his own solitude. After dinner, as Belle made her way through the castle's corridors, she found herself reflecting on the small moment that had passed between them. It had been brief, almost imperceptible, yet it had felt like the first sign of something changing. She could not quite put her finger on it, but there was a softness in the air, a feeling that perhaps the beast was not as untouchable as he once seemed. In the following days, Belle began to notice more subtle changes, small gestures that spoke of a growing understanding between them. It was in the way the beast no longer withdrew into the shadows when she entered a room, but instead remained present, though still distant. It was in the way he seemed to wait for her before he began his evening meal, as though the silence between them had become a shared ritual. One afternoon, as Belle wandered the garden, lost in the quiet beauty of the place, she heard the soft rustle of footsteps behind her. Turning, she saw the beast standing at the edge of the garden, watching her from a distance. He did not approach, but there was something in his gaze that held her attention, a flicker of curiosity perhaps, or something deeper. Belle took a step toward him, her movements slow and deliberate. There was no fear in her heart, only a quiet desire to bridge the distance between them. She had learned to see beyond the beast's monstrous appearance, to recognize the sadness that lay beneath his exterior. And in that moment, she felt an unspoken invitation, a chance to reach out and offer him the understanding he had long been denied. She stopped a few feet away, her gaze steady as she met his eyes. For a long moment, they stood there in silence, the weight of the unspoken between them heavy in the air. But then the beast did something that surprised her. He lowered his head slightly, a gesture of acknowledgement, as if inviting her to speak, to break the silence that had long defined their interactions. Belle's voice was soft, her words slow and deliberate. "I know you are not just a monster," she said, her gaze never leaving his. "I know there is more to you than what you show the world." For a long moment, the beast said nothing. His expression was unreadable, but Belle could see the faintest flicker of something in his eyes, something that resembled hope or perhaps gratitude. And for the first time since her arrival, she felt as though she had truly reached him. In the days that followed, their encounters became less awkward, less strained. There were moments when they passed one another in the halls, and their eyes would meet with a quiet understanding, a wordless exchange that spoke of something beyond the fear and isolation that had once separated them. Belle no longer saw the beast as a creature of terror, but as a soul bound by a curse, longing for connection, for kindness, for the touch of another being who did not see only the monster but the man he had once been. The days grew longer, and the air in the castle seemed to shift with the changing seasons. And though Belle still could not imagine the full extent of the beast's suffering, she began to understand that the path to breaking the curse would not be one of grand gestures or dramatic acts. It would be found in the quiet moments, the unspoken exchanges, and the understanding that grew between them, small but powerful, like the gentle unfolding of a flower after a long winter. Chapter 10. The relationship transforms. Moments of calm and connection. The days in the castle, once filled with uncertainty and a quiet sense of fear, began to shift. A gentle warmth seemed to fill the halls, not from the changing seasons outside, but from something deeper. A slow, almost imperceptible transformation in the relationship between Belle and the beast. Their encounters, once fraught with tension and awkwardness, began to take on a new, quieter rhythm, as if the very air around them had softened. Belle found herself looking forward to their meetings, not with the eagerness of expectation, but with the quiet calm of someone anticipating the stillness that only true understanding could bring. She had learned to read the subtle cues of the beast's presence, the way he would stand just out of her reach, never intruding but always there, as if waiting for her to make the first move. And gradually she did. One evening, as the soft light of the setting sun filtered through the tall windows of the castle's great hall, Belle sat by the fireplace, a book resting in her lap. The flickering flames cast dancing shadows across the stone walls, creating a sense of tranquility that filled the room. She was lost in the quiet comfort of the moment when she heard the familiar sound of heavy footsteps approaching. Without turning, she spoke softly, knowing it was the beast. "I've been thinking," she said, her voice gentle, "about the garden. It's so beautiful yet so silent. It feels like a place where time stands still." The beast, standing in the doorway, seemed hesitant, as though her words had stirred something within him. He paused for a moment before stepping closer, his presence filling the space without overwhelming it. His gaze was fixed on her, though his face remained unreadable, the sadness still lurking in his eyes. "The garden," he began slowly, his voice rough but softer than it had been before, "was once a place where I could escape. Before everything changed." His words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken meaning. Belle lowered her book and looked up at him, her gaze soft with empathy. She did not press him for more. She simply listened, offering her quiet attention as a space where he could share if he chose. The beast seemed to sense her patience, her openness. He stepped closer, his massive form casting a long shadow across the floor as he settled into a chair opposite Belle. The room seemed to grow even quieter in his presence, as if the very walls themselves had learned to hold their breath, waiting for what would come next. "I was once different," the beast said, his voice barely above a whisper, as though speaking the words aloud made them more real. "I was a man like any other. I had a family, a life that seemed ordinary, but it was mine." He paused, his gaze drifting as if searching for something in the distant past. "But I was cruel. I took for granted all that I had, my home, my people, the love that surrounded me. And so I was punished." Belle sat quietly, absorbing his words without interruption. There was no judgment in her eyes, only the quiet presence of someone who understood that every story, every life, carried its own pain and its own lessons. "The curse," he continued, his voice trembling slightly, "it wasn't just a punishment. It was a mirror showing me what I had become, what I had done. I am not only trapped by the magic, it is my own actions that keep me here." The words hung in the air, thick with the weight of regret. Belle felt a deep sorrow for him, not for the beast he had become, but for the man who had once been lost in his own pride and cruelty. She felt the stirrings of something deep within her, an empathy that she had not known she was capable of, a connection that went beyond the fearsome exterior to the heart of a soul that had been broken, reshaped by its own mistakes. For a long time there was silence between them. Belle could hear the faint crackling of the fire, the soft rustle of the wind outside, but in the space between her and the beast, there was only quiet understanding. She could sense that he had shared something of great personal significance, something that had taken years for him to bring to light. Finally, Belle spoke, her voice soft but steady. I think that everyone has a past, and sometimes it's the choices we make that shape us. But we're not defined by them, are we? We can change. The beast's eyes flickered with something like hope, though it was still faint, like a distant star just beginning to break through the darkness. He did not respond immediately, but Belle could see that her words had touched something deep within him. For the first time since her arrival, the beast seemed to relax, his body less tense, as though a weight had been lifted, even if just for a moment. He let out a long, slow breath, as though he had been holding it for years, waiting for the right moment to exhale. And in that quiet room, with the fire's glow flickering softly and the world outside seemingly holding its breath, Belle and the beast sat together, sharing not just silence, but an understanding that was beginning to grow between them, an understanding that there was more to each of them than the roles they had played, more than the masks they had worn. There was pain, yes, but there was also the possibility of something new, something that could heal, if only they allowed it to. The moments stretched on, calm and still, like a river flowing gently through time. There were no grand promises, no sudden gestures of change, just two souls quietly finding a way toward each other, piece by piece. As the evening drew to a close, Belle rose from her chair and moved toward the door, glancing back once before leaving the room. "Thank you," she said softly, her words a quiet acknowledgement of the trust he had shown, of the small step they had taken together. The beast, watching her leave, felt something stir within him, a flicker of hope that perhaps there was still time to change, to find a way back to the light. Chapter 11. The Beast's Request, Belle's Decision. The days flowed gently by in the castle, each one blending into the next like the soft murmurs of a quiet stream. Belle had come to know the rhythm of her life within these grand stone walls. Mornings spent walking in the garden, afternoons reading by the fireplace, and the evenings often shared with the beast in a still, peaceful silence that felt both comforting and intimate. Their interactions, once marked by distance and caution, had slowly transformed into a kind of unspoken understanding. There was no rush, no expectation, just the calm presence of one another. One evening, as twilight deepened and the soft glow of the moon poured through the tall windows, Belle found herself in the library, her favorite place in the castle. The shelves, laden with old books and forgotten tales, seemed to invite her to get lost in their pages. But tonight, she could not focus entirely on the stories that surrounded her. Her mind kept returning to the beast. She felt a shift in the air, a sense of quiet anticipation, as if something important was about to unfold. It was then that the door to the library creaked open, and the beast stepped inside. His silhouette loomed in the doorway, his form a shadow in the dim light, but tonight, there was something different in the way he stood. His shoulders were not as tense, his head not as high. He seemed smaller, somehow more fragile than usual. Belle looked up from her book, her gaze soft and steady. She could feel his presence in a way that was almost palpable, like the weight of his thoughts was pressing against the walls of the room. She set her book aside and rose to her feet, offering him a quiet smile, one that held no judgment, only understanding. The beast took a step forward, his eyes meeting hers, though there was a hesitation in his movements, as if unsure of how to proceed. For a long moment, neither of them spoke. The silence stretched between them, neither uncomfortable nor forced, just a calm, gentle pause, as if they were both waiting for the right words to come. Finally, the beast broke the stillness with a voice that was quieter than usual, as though the very act of speaking made his request more real. "Belle," he began, his voice low, almost uncertain, I have wondered for some time now what you truly think of me." The question hung in the air, delicate and heavy all at once. Belle's heart stirred with a soft, understanding ache. She could feel the vulnerability in his words, the quiet plea for some kind of assurance, for some glimpse of hope in the darkness that had surrounded him for so long. For a moment, Belle simply looked at him, taking in the sight of the beast before her. His eyes, once sharp and menacing, now held a softness that had not been there before. His posture, though still imposing, seemed less threatening, more weary than anything else. He was not just the beast now, he was a being with depth, with emotion, and with a story that had yet to be fully told. She stepped closer, her movements slow and calm, and gently met his gaze. "What I think of you," she began, her voice steady and warm, "is that you are not just the creature you see in the mirror. You are more than your appearance, more than the curse that has trapped you. I see someone who has known great pain, someone who has been lost but is searching for a way to find peace." Her words were simple, yet filled with a quiet truth that seemed to touch something deep within the beast. He stood still, his eyes never leaving hers, as if the very act of hearing her words was enough to soothe the ache he had carried for so long. "I see someone who is trying," she continued, her voice soft but unwavering. "I see someone who, despite everything, has moments of kindness, of vulnerability. You are not your past, and you are not the curse. You are someone who deserves to be understood, to be seen as you truly are." The beast blinked slowly, as though her words had gently unraveled something inside him. He had heard many things over the years, words of fear, of hatred, even pity, but never words like these. Her voice, filled with warmth and compassion, seemed to wash over him like a gentle breeze, easing the burden that had weighed him down for so long. For a long while there was silence between them. Neither of them spoke, but in that quiet space something had shifted. It was as if a door had opened, just a crack, and through it the possibility of healing had begun to seep in. The beast took a slow, steady breath, as though coming to terms with something he had long avoided. "I have spent so long hiding from who I am," he said, his voice barely a whisper, "that I forgot there could be someone who might see me, without fear." Belle reached out, her hand finding his in a gesture of quiet comfort. There was no grand display of affection, no dramatic confession. Just the simple, peaceful connection of two beings who had come to understand one another in a way that transcended words. "I see you," Belle said softly, her fingers lightly brushing against his. "I see you as you are now, and I believe that you can be more than what you were." The beast looked down at her hand in his, the small, tender touch grounding him in a way he had never known. And for the first time in a long while, he allowed himself to believe that there might be a future where he could shed the weight of his past, where he could find redemption, not through magic or spells, but through the quiet, patient understanding of another soul. As the minutes passed, Belle and the beast stood there together, connected not by words, but by something deeper. It was a moment of quiet intimacy, of two hearts meeting in the stillness, sharing something that needed no explanation, no grand gestures. It was enough. And in that peaceful silence, the beast finally understood that it was not only the curse that had kept him locked away, but his own fears, his own doubts. And now, with Belle's words, those walls began to crumble little by little, until all that remained was the quiet hope of what might come next. Chapter 12. The confrontation with the beast and the breaking of the curse. The days in the castle passed in a soft, steady rhythm, like the gentle ebb and flow of a quiet river. Belle and the beast, now more familiar with one another, had shared many quiet moments in the stillness of the castle's halls, learning to understand each other's hearts in ways that were simple but profound. It was a life that, in its own way, had become comfortable, like the calm embrace of the morning sun stretching over the horizon. But on this particular evening, something felt different. The air in the castle was thick with unspoken emotions, and a sense of anticipation hung like a delicate veil, softly brushing against the walls. It was as if the entire castle was holding its breath, waiting for something to change. Belle could feel it too, an undeniable pull in her heart, a sense that the time had come for something important to unfold. She found herself in the gardens, the soft rustle of the leaves around her creating a gentle, calming sound. The evening was cool, the sky above a tapestry of deep blues and purples, with the first stars beginning to twinkle. As she walked along the path, her thoughts drifted, as they often did, to the beast. Her heart had grown fond of him, though the path to understanding had not always been easy. The complexity of their relationship had shifted with time, like the changing seasons, slow, steady, and yet unmistakable. It was then that she saw him. The beast stood by the fountain, his broad shoulders hunched in a way that suggested a deep, unspoken weight. He gazed into the water, his expression distant, as though he were lost in thought. There was a quiet sorrow in the air, something that reached out and touched Belle's heart with an unexpected tenderness. She approached him slowly, her footsteps light and deliberate, not wanting to startle him. The sound of her approach seemed to draw him from his thoughts, and he turned to face her, his eyes meeting hers with an intensity that was both gentle and profound. "Belle," he said softly, his voice a quiet rumble in the stillness of the evening. "I have been thinking. I have been thinking about everything, the curse, my past, all the things I have carried for so long." His eyes looked deep into hers, his gaze filled with a raw honesty. "And I wonder if it is possible for someone like me to ever change. If I can be forgiven, not by others but by myself." Belle stood still for a moment, taking in the weight of his words. The beast, standing before her, was no longer the figure of menace and fear that he had once been. He was a being of deep emotion, a soul that had been shaped by his own struggles, by his own mistakes. There was something vulnerable in him now, something that made Belle's heart ache with understanding. She took a step closer, her voice soft but steady. "I believe change is always possible, beast," she said, her words gentle but filled with conviction. "I believe that the heart, no matter how lost it feels, can always find its way back to what is true. It's not about perfection or about being who others want you to be. It's about being honest with yourself, about accepting both your light and your darkness." The beast listened intently, his eyes never leaving hers. In that moment, something seemed to shift, a subtle change in the way he held himself. The heavy burden of his past, which had always seemed so immense, now seemed to soften, as if Belle's words had begun to unbind the knots that had kept him trapped for so long. "I have feared that love was something beyond my reach," he said, his voice quiet, almost uncertain. "That the curse I carry is more than just an outward appearance. It is who I am, what I deserve. But you, Belle, you have shown me a different truth." There was a pause, a long stretch of quiet between them, filled only with the soft whispers of the wind through the trees. Belle could feel her heart racing, her mind full of thoughts that she didn't have the words to express. It was as if everything they had gone through, every moment of silence, every word of understanding, had led to this one point in time. "I do not know how to undo what has been done," the beast continued, his voice thick with emotion, "but I want you to know that I care for you, Belle, more than I have ever cared for anyone." The words hung in the air, fragile and delicate, like the first bloom of spring after a long winter. Belle's heart responded to them, not with words, but with a quiet certainty that had been growing in her soul. She had seen the beast for who he truly was, beneath the exterior, beneath the curse, and she had come to love him, not in spite of his pain, but because of it. Slowly, almost hesitantly, Belle stepped closer to him. She reached out her hand, her fingers trembling slightly as they brushed against his rough skin. The touch was soft, a small, tender gesture, but it spoke volumes of acceptance, of love, of everything that had been left unsaid. The beast's eyes softened as he looked down at her, and for the first time in what seemed like an eternity, he allowed himself to believe in the possibility of redemption. The weight of his curse, which had once seemed so insurmountable, began to lift slowly, gently, like the morning fog clearing under the warmth of the sun. As they stood there, side by side, the magic that had bound them, his curse, began to unravel. The transformation was not dramatic or sudden, but it was there like the slow, steady change of seasons. The once imposing, terrifying figure of the beast began to soften, his form slowly shifting, his features gradually becoming more human. His eyes, though still deep and wise, lost the harshness they had once carried. His posture straightened, no longer burdened by the weight of a monstrous form. And then, as if to confirm what had already been felt, a soft glow began to fill the space around them, bathing the garden in a warm, golden light. It was a quiet transformation, one that spoke of love, of understanding, of acceptance. The curse, once so powerful, had been broken, not by force but by the quiet, enduring power of connection and compassion. Belle looked up at the beast, now transformed into a man, his features gentle and kind. And in that moment she understood. This was not the end of their journey, but the beginning of something new. A journey where they would continue to learn, to grow, and to love each other with the quiet, steady strength that had carried them through all their trials. Together they stood in the garden, the glow of the fading light around them, knowing that whatever came next they would face it together, with hearts open and full of hope. Chapter 13. The Final Transformation. The Prince's Revelation. The garden was quiet, the stillness of the evening hanging in the air like a soft, comforting blanket. The golden glow of the fading light bathed the world in warmth, casting long shadows that seemed to stretch out in harmony with the slow, peaceful rhythm of time. Every leaf, every petal seemed to shimmer with a quiet energy, as though the entire castle itself was holding its breath, waiting for something profound to unfold. Belle stood close to the man who had once been the beast, her hand still resting gently in his. His features were soft, his expression kind and full of emotion, but there was a lingering sense that something had not yet fully shifted. The magic that had been at work for so long, weaving its curse, had finally begun to unravel, but there was still a final moment of change to come. A moment of quiet transformation that would seal the bond between them. The man, now standing tall and serene beside her, looked down at her with a tenderness that spoke volumes. His eyes were filled with gratitude, but also with a quiet understanding, as though he could feel the gentle process of healing unfolding within him, just as Belle could feel it in her own heart. The air around them seemed to hum with anticipation, not in a rush or hurry, but in a calm, deliberate way, as if the universe itself knew that the time was right for the final step of this journey. "I have never truly known peace," he said softly, his voice like a whisper carried by the wind. "Not until this moment. And I owe it all to you, Belle." She smiled at him, her heart full of warmth. She had seen the sorrow he carried for so long, the weight of his curse, and now she saw the quiet promise of something new. It was not a grand transformation, not a sudden shift, but a gentle unfolding of all that was hidden beneath the surface. In the stillness of the moment, the magic that had bound him began to dissolve, its power weakening like a distant echo, slowly fading into the background. As Belle watched, something subtle began to change. The man's form, though still warm and human, seemed to shimmer with a soft light, as though the very essence of who he was being revealed layer by layer. His features, once sharp and rugged, now softened with a grace that felt timeless. His posture, once burdened by the weight of a monstrous form, became relaxed, unburdened. The transformation was not dramatic, but rather serene and beautiful, like the changing of the seasons. The man's features began to shift and refine themselves, until, after what felt like an eternity of quiet moments, he stood before her, no longer the beast, but a handsome prince. His eyes full of the wisdom and sorrow of all that had come before, yet now shining with the clarity of someone who had been freed from a heavy, long-held burden. Belle took a deep breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of awe and understanding. This moment, this quiet transformation, felt like the natural progression of everything they had been through, the struggle, the healing, the love. It had all led to this point where the curse was finally lifted, not through magic or force, but through the simple, powerful act of connection and understanding. The prince, now standing before her with a serene expression, smiled gently. "I am free," he whispered, as though the words themselves were a form of release, a surrender to the truth that had been hidden for so long. "I am free thanks to you." Belle's heart fluttered softly in her chest, and she stepped closer to him, her hand reaching up to touch his cheek, the skin warm and smooth beneath her fingers. "You have always been free," she said quietly, her voice full of gentle truth. "It was just a matter of time before you realized it." The prince looked down at her with deep affection, his eyes shining with gratitude. In that moment, there was no rush, no urgency, only the quiet recognition of what had been lost and what had been found. They stood there together in the garden, surrounded by the soft glow of the evening, knowing that the world had shifted in ways both grand and small, but always with a calm and steady certainty. There were no dramatic celebrations, no loud proclamations. Instead, there was only the soft unfolding of a new beginning, one that was filled with promise but also with peace. The transformation had come not in an instant, but over the course of a journey, of shared moments, of silent understanding, of love that had grown in the quietest of ways. As they stood there in the garden, the world around them seemed to embrace this moment, as though time itself was gently bowing to the beauty of what had occurred. The curse was broken, the beast was gone, and in his place stood the man who had always been there, waiting for the right moment to emerge, like the gentle bloom of a flower at dawn. Belle smiled softly, her heart full of warmth. "We are both free now," she said, her words calm and certain. "And we will walk this new path together as we always should have." The prince nodded, his smile full of quiet joy. "Together," he repeated softly. And in that serene, peaceful moment, they both knew that this was not the end, but the beginning of something new. A beginning filled with the promise of healing, of love, and of a life that had finally found its way back to the light. Chapter 14: Belle and the Prince's Union, the Wedding and Happiness. In the quiet of the castle, where the walls seemed to breathe in rhythm with the passing of time, Belle and the prince found a gentle peace. The air was cool and soft, carrying with it the scent of blooming flowers from the gardens below, filling the halls with an almost tangible tranquility. It was as if the world itself had exhaled, relieved of the weight that had once been so heavy, and now everything seemed to slow to a comfortable, serene pace. The days had softened, moving gently like the unfolding of a story, one where the beginning was no longer marred by pain or fear, but instead bathed in the soft light of understanding and love. Belle and the prince, once so distant from each other, now found themselves in the quiet companionship of shared moments. There was no rush, no overwhelming sense of urgency, only the slow, deliberate unfolding of their connection. Each glance, each touch, was a quiet testament to the bond they had nurtured with such patience and care. As time passed, their relationship deepened naturally, like the steady growth of a tree, its roots planted firmly in the rich soil of trust and affection. The prince, once burdened by his past and the curse that had bound him, now found solace in the gentle presence of Belle by his side. Her kindness, her quiet strength, had become the light that illuminated his world. She, in turn, had found in him a partner who understood the value of patience, of compassion, and of quiet strength. And then there came the day when they stood together, surrounded by the soft glow of the castle, a symbol of their new beginning. It was a simple ceremony, unadorned by extravagance, but filled with the deep resonance of love and mutual respect. The air was still, as though even the castle itself was holding its breath in reverence of the moment. The two stood before the gathered few, their eyes only for each other, their hearts beating in quiet unison. The wedding was not marked by grand celebrations, but by a quiet promise, one made not in the presence of a crowd, but in the shared understanding of what they had overcome and what they had become. There were no loud cheers, no overwhelming applause. Instead, there was a serene calm that filled the space, as though the world around them had come to rest in this perfect moment. Belle wore a gown of soft, flowing fabric, the pale color a reflection of her calm spirit, the simple elegance of her dress matching the simplicity of their love. The prince, standing beside her, was clothed in rich but understated robes, the fabric smooth and dignified, fitting him as though it had been woven for him by time itself. His eyes, still warm and full of quiet joy, never left her face. They exchanged vows in a whisper, the words so soft they seemed to blend with the gentle hum of the castle. They spoke not only of love, but of the quiet understanding they had come to share, of the beauty of their union, of the joy found in the simplicity of being together. "I promise to cherish you." The prince's voice was calm but firm, "in all things, in all ways. For the rest of our days, we shall be together as we were meant to be." Belle's voice was just as steady, the words flowing from her as naturally as the river flowing through the castle's gardens. "And I promise to stand by your side with all my heart, for there is no other place I would rather be than here with you." In that moment, time seemed to stand still. The gentle breeze rustled the leaves of the trees outside, and the sun's warm light filtered through the windows, casting a golden glow across the room. There was no sense of rushing, no impatience, only the quiet knowledge that they were exactly where they were meant to be. The ceremony concluded, and though there was no grand fanfare, the two shared a quiet, intimate celebration. The day drifted by like a soft, peaceful dream, with moments of laughter, of shared joy, and of a contentment that was not fleeting but lasting, built on the foundation of everything they had overcome together. Their days together were simple, filled with the small, quiet moments that made up the tapestry of a peaceful life. They spent time in the gardens, walking slowly and taking in the beauty of the flowers that bloomed around them, their colors rich and vibrant, yet never overwhelming. There were shared meals in the great hall, with the soft clink of silverware and the gentle hum of conversation, but mostly there was silence. An easy silence, one that came from understanding, from knowing that sometimes the most profound things could be said without a single word. At night, they would sit together by the fire, the warmth of the flames reflecting in their eyes as they talked softly about the future. They spoke of their hopes, their dreams, but also of the quiet joy they found in simply being together. There were no grand plans, no rush to achieve anything more than the contentment they already shared. It was enough for them to simply exist in each other's company, to be present in the moment as time moved gently around them. Belle had found a home in the prince, not just a castle, but a life, one built on understanding, love, and patience. The prince had found in her the peace he had longed for, the calm that had eluded him for so long. Together they created a life that was rich, not in possessions or wealth, but in the simple beauty of shared quiet moments. And so they lived, slowly, peacefully, contentedly, forever free from the shadows of the past. Their love, like the castle they lived in, was no longer a place of curses and fear, but a sanctuary of calm and understanding. Together they had created a life filled with light, one where each day was a quiet affirmation of the love they shared, a love that had blossomed in the most unexpected of places and had transformed their lives in ways both quiet and profound. Chapter 15. Conclusion: The true beauty in the love that heals. As the days slowly drifted by, the castle, once a place of shadow and sorrow, had blossomed into a sanctuary of light, warmth, and peace. The walls, which had once seemed cold and imposing, now felt like an embrace, welcoming, comforting, and full of quiet joy. In the stillness of the evening, when the stars began to twinkle in the vast, velvet sky, Belle and the prince would often reflect on the journey that had brought them here, to this place of calm and understanding. Their love, like the gentle flow of a river, had deepened over time. It was not a love born from grand gestures or dramatic moments, but from the quiet, everyday acts of kindness, patience, and care. The beauty they had found in each other was not one of outward appearance, but something much deeper, something that resonated in their hearts and souls. Belle, once a girl who had sought something beyond the ordinary, had come to understand that the most extraordinary things in life were often the simplest. She had found beauty not in the perfect lines of a face or the gleam of gold, but in the kindness of a heart, the depth of understanding, and the patience to see beyond the surface. The prince, too, had learned that true beauty was not something that could be captured or measured by the eye, but something that grew in the quiet corners of the heart. Together, they had discovered that love was not a force that could be hurried, nor a bond that could be forged in haste. It was something that bloomed slowly, patiently, over time, nurtured by understanding, trust, and compassion. The transformation that had once seemed so distant, so impossible, was not just one of appearance, but one of spirit, of healing and growth. The curse had been lifted, but the real magic had come from within, through the gentle power of love and the quiet strength of patience. In the soft glow of the evening, as the gentle wind whispered through the trees and the moon cast its silver light across the landscape, Belle and the prince would walk together through the gardens, their hands intertwined in the comfortable silence that had become their language. No words were needed. The connection they shared was deep, timeless, and serene. It was a love that had healed them both, healing the prince's heart, once hardened by bitterness, and healing Belle's longing for something beyond what the world had shown her. As they moved forward together, side by side, they knew that their journey was one that would continue to unfold, one that would be marked not by grand victories or dramatic changes, but by the quiet joys of shared moments and the deep satisfaction of knowing that true beauty, true love, lay not in what they had once imagined, but in what they had found in each other. The castle, now a home of peace and love, stood as a testament to the power of change, of love, and of the quiet, patient process of healing. It was no longer a place of mystery or fear, but one of serenity, a sanctuary where love could grow and flourish without the shadow of doubt or sorrow. In the end, the lesson was clear. True beauty is not found in perfection or outward appearances, but in the goodness of the heart, in the kindness shared between souls, and in the love that heals even the deepest wounds. And so, Belle and the prince continued their life together, in harmony and peace, forever reminded that love, gentle, kind, and patient, is the greatest magic of all. Thank you for joining us for tonight's story. If you enjoyed this relaxing journey, please give us a like, subscribe to the channel, and let us know in the comments what stories you'd like to hear next. Sweet dreams, and see you again soon for more bedtime stories to help you unwind and drift into peaceful sleep.